Thank you very much. Yeah, our presentation is a co-presentation by Jeffrey Witt, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Loyola University in Maryland, and myself, Christoph. I'm a postdoc at the Bibliotheca Hertziana, which is a Max-Planck-Institut for art history. This presentation is about images and their context within historical documents such as manuscripts or printed books. Scientific images, for example, diagrams, are often of no great interest to art historians or those interested in the visual culture of science. They're very tiny and they have little aesthetic value. However, those images are an indispensable part of historical documents and add to the understanding of scientific or philosophical ideas. And let us assume that images contained in these documents are crucial for their understanding. We would like to depart today from this observation. Images are transmitted along with these historical texts, but printed editions, modern printed editions, focus on text and neglect the variety of these images. And what we aim for is creating digital editions so that all images should be connected to their context in a transparent way. And IIIF serves in this way. The manifest and the canvases related to these images should be linked. And as for efficiency, these discoveries of those linked manifests and canvases should be facilitated and stored. This is very abstract. Let us take a concrete example. I will focus on research I'm currently doing, which is a treatise on magnetism, actually the first treatise ever on this topic, written by a scholar named Petrus Peregrinus. This treatise is called Epistola de Magnete and written in the 13th century. There has been made a critical edition published in 1995, and there are somewhat 50 manuscripts extant and 4 early modern printed editions. And many of these manuscripts and prints contain diagrams. So this is, I think, a good case study. So these are 2 pages of this critical edition. Here you see the edited text, and here as well from the other page. So the text that the editor has established through his research. And in blue here, we have what is called critical apparatus, where you see all the variants of all manuscripts and prints. So where, for example, omissions or additions were made, but not taken into the edition, so that you can see those. Every page has this critical apparatus, like in a regular critical edition. And also the editor has included one image. So where does the image come from? He chose to pick the image as printed in an early modern edition of 1558. So he just took that image and put it in his critical edition. It shows what is called a magnetic perpetuum mobile, so a device that has a continuous movement driven by magnetic repulsion and attraction. Of course, this doesn't work, but it is the idea of the medieval author and depicted as such. However, there are many, many more diagrams or images of this device in all manuscripts and prints available. I've collected here around 20, and this is not complete. So how does the editor actually choose which one to pick? Does he take the oldest, or should he take the most beautiful one, or the most complicated one, complex one? So what is the criteria? And with the choice he made, there is another problem, not just leaving out all the other images by picking one, deciding for one. The image he took has a problem in itself. So the image as shown is incorrect, is not in concordance with what the text describes. So I won't explain the technical details, but this magnet here actually need to be tilted away from the axis. So here it aligns with the axis, but actually it should be tilted away, like in this image, another image of the same device. So he made a choice that is also arguably doubtful, as it does not really match with the text. So this is all pretty much what scholars face with creating traditional critical editions of historical documents. And from three quotations I took from a recent article by father and son, Boris and Nicholas Jardine, on this issue. I will read out those three quotations because I think they're very much to the point. Editors of past diagrams, like editors of past texts, face a recurrent quandary. How far are they entitled to pander to modern viewers or readers by modifying past conventions or breaking with them? So these editorial conventions are relevant, for example, if editors choose to make diagrams from scratch. So, for example, create vector graphics instead of taking the original picture. And then the question comes up, how should that image look like? Should it be a copy or a newly created diagram, for example? Let us turn to the second quotation. There are long-established conventions for the recording of textual variants, errors, deletions, substitutions, marginalia, etc. It would be most helpful to have a measure of agreement on similar apparatus for diagrams. So texts are transcribed, or textual variants are recorded in the critical apparatus, but there is no such thing for images. It has just not been established how to tackle the difference of images in a critical apparatus and how to keep track of all these differences. So let me come to this last quotation. It is already feasible to present huge amounts of information in digital editions. The combination of digital storage, hypertext presentation, and various forms of indexing make such copious editing a realistic prospect. So printed editions are, of course, bound by their production costs. You only have a limited amount of pages you can print on. Only the digital edition can, in principle at least, include or link to a myriad of images, which would in part solve the problem. And here I would like to turn over to Jeffrey's part.
Great. So you can see my screen, Christoph, yes?
Yes.
All right, so I'd want to pick up right with this last quote here. I think this quote, the third quotation, really shows us the suggestion that the digital medium offers us a new possibility to, what I would say, transparently reveal the history of a figure's representation. But unfortunately, neither digital editions nor IIIF available images fulfill this promise automatically. And from my point of view, it's actually a curious fact that while many IIIF viewers have been built around the ambition to facilitate comparison, the act of meaningful comparison in a IIIF viewer today, from my perspective, actually remains quite burdensome, at least in comparison to what is or should be possible. So, after happening upon a given figure, or even a paragraph or a small quotation in a codex, the act of comparing that figure against other comparable figures or other comparable textual phenomena is actually quite hard. First, one already has to know that the comparable figure exists before they can go looking for it. And once they're aware of its existence, they're still required to discover a myriad of containers in order to arrive at the object of interest. And so I call this the Russian doll discovery, right? So even if I know that there's another perpetuum mobile out there in the world, I have to find the institution that holds the containing codex. Then I have to find the codex in their catalog. Then from that catalog entry, I got to find the manifest. And well, okay, that seems great. I can put it in a Mirador, a IIIF viewer, but actually there could be hundreds of pages in there. And now I have to find on which page or canvas this figure exists. And I think most people think, well, this has come quite a ways, but anyone familiar with manuscripts knows how much text could be on a single page, and some pages may have very, very tiny images. So finding the comparable piece of text or the comparable image still requires a lot of labor. And remember that this is just for one image, and Christoph here has showed us 20. So there's a lot of labor to bring all of these images into a comparable viewer. And when my goal really is to see some particular object, my question is, why are there so many ancillary discovery requirements? Why can't I just expect the viewer to I tell the viewer what I want to see and expect the viewer to take me to all the resources of interest, and loading what it needs to load in order to do this without requiring any further discovery of ancillary containers on my part. So I think this kind of discovery is possible, but in my experience, it's only possible when we care about more than just IIIF. It requires attention to how we model and transcribe the textual resources, which are in turn carried by the images that are served by IIIF. So I think this kind of modeling has to be done by a kind of trans-institutional scholarly communities whose mission and focus is not on the material items possessed by a given library or museum, but on the abstract ideas that simultaneously live in many material items possessed by many different libraries and museums. So this is the intention of the archive that I run. And one of the things we try to do is be a kind of text data publisher. And we purposely think of textual resources, including scientific figures, in an abstraction from the historical material carriers of that data. And it's this abstraction that I think, well, actually, and maybe ironically, enables us to connect all the scattered material instantiations of these text resources. So our time is really short. I'm just going to show like a couple of diagrams to just give you a glimpse of how we're doing this, and I'll try to just show you how it works. So basically, our idea is not just to create sort of draw a box on an image and create an annotation and then create a human readable discoveries, create a human readable description, but to actually resist that common pattern. The idea is to make a transcription and then use that transcription as a catalyst to generate new abstract entities with their own IDs, to which further transcriptions, or if you want to call them annotations, that's fine, can be mapped and then grouped along with their connection to a given canvas or coordinate region. So you might be able to gain from an individual image on this particular page or this particular canvas and its transcription, we can then generate the idea of the image in all the instances, which we call the figure manifestation, which then bubbles up to a more generic idea of the figure in general, which we call the figure expression, to which all the figure manifestations can be mapped. And the creation of this figure expression abstraction becomes the vehicle through which one can move in any direction, such that starting anywhere, one can discover everything else. All right. So in practice, the TI transcription with a number of IDs that are coordinated. Every night, a crawler goes over all of these transcriptions and builds a graph, right? And the result of that graph is a network. So all of those abstract ideas are now kind of become concrete resources. And now I'd like to just end by showing you kind of what that kind of looks like in the context of the problem that Christoph mentioned for us. So what I could imagine is, I'm going to switch over here to the BSB side, is that a user or scholar looking through a book and stumbles upon an interesting image. But it's interesting to note, given, in the back of our mind, we know how much context is here. There's many other images, but the experience here is kind of a dead end. We have this image and it's kind of like, okay, what else? I'm not aware of anything else. IIIF viewers tend to be so focused on the manuscript here that not only is there not an ID for this general image, we don't even really have access to the ID for the canvas here, right? But let's imagine that we found this, and then let's imagine that we put this into a viewer that had access to the network, right? So I'm taking that common ID here, takes me that page, and I can ask it, show me all of the textual phenomena that appear on this page, right? And I can do this for any page. Coming back, I get, it can show me the paragraphs that are there, right? This one has some other images, okay? So I come back to the one we're focused on, 45. And I say, so the network tells me, hey, there's a scientific figure here. And I can say, oh, show me all the other ones, right? And immediately I have these at my fingertips. Okay. And the idea is this is not information that you have to come to this website to experience. Here's the Sparkle query that is needed, and you simply send this Sparkle query to a public endpoint, and everyone has the information at their disposal to provide this kind of information to their end user. right? And then we can see that resource in context, right? So within the text that we see, or we could use it to populate a search service for all images. So we might look for all figures, okay? And we can see different figures here. We can come to that figure, and then we can get information about it. You know, and to prove the point that we don't just have to experience this information in this website, right? I can flip over to Mirador here, and I can ask Mirador, hey, go get all the manifests that are needed to show me this image. Go load the canvas where these images are. Hey, zoom in to the images that we're trying to focus on. All of that is discovered for you, and it's not something that you have to do. So let me close simply by saying, by coming back to this graphic, you know, to me, technical specific aside, it's really astounding how much labor Christoph's done just to collect all these images. And equally astounding that if someone else, right, wanted to create their own display or work with these images, all the work that Christoph has done to create this slide would have to be repeated, right? I'd have to discover the manuscript that they're in. I'd go to the page, find the coordinates. And that's sort of the problem. Why don't we have ways to capture this information so that it never has to be done again? What does this mean for IIIF? I'll just end with my, you know, polemical suggestion. I think if IIIF is going to be part of the realization of something like Vannevar Bush's Memex machine, where all their information is at our fingertips wherever we are, rather than forcing us to go to different places to experience, then IIIF and the libraries serving those images really urgently need to care about more than images and more than IIIF. I think they should be collaborating closer with trans-institutional publishing groups, textual scholars, textual archives, who are working to model other kinds of data, the immaterial textual resources that are carried by the material canvases. And to me, it's the combination of these models that's really transformative. And without it, I think IIIF sometimes risks becoming synonymous with zooming images and not much more. So we'll end right there. Thanks so much, and we hope there's time for some questions.
Okay, it looks like there is one question in the Q&A. How should the user interface help the user know if they should annotate the specific manifestation or the concept of the image? Can they control that reliably?
Well, I think that I'll just be a little frank. I think that like it's a lot of excitement about using the annotation tools in our IIIF viewers, and I just kind of think like we shouldn't be creating our information that way. Like that's not a very scalable solution. We should really be focused on the publication process of the textual resources and then creating maps between those resources so that the annotations that get viewed in the presentation layer, they get built on the fly from a deeper layer of information. So we should really be focusing on how are we publishing texts, how are we publishing editions, so that annotations can be made automatically. That's what I showed you in the Mirador view, right? Like I don't keep my information in necessarily in web annotations, but if Mirador needs web annotations to display things, then no problem. I just created those annotations on the fly from a deeper layer of information.
Are there any other questions from folks? We have about a minute left. If you'd like to enter one, and attendees can feel free to unmute themselves if they'd like to just ask the question out loud as well.
This was about images, but there's certainly nothing here that doesn't apply also to those textual resources like you're talking about. If I wanted to have that top level concept be, you know, Matthew 3:13.
Yeah, in fact, that's here's going to take you to the same paragraph in Latin and French. And I can do this for every paragraph, every quotation in our corpus of 50 million words. So I think with the idea with the scientific figures is, do you think of their images? But I don't think they're images. I think they're textual resources, right? That just are not made up of letters, they're made up of shapes. So we don't treat them any differently.
All right, any final questions?
I think Christoph and I are happy to take emails or questions on Twitter or anywhere or on the Whova. So please feel free to reach out.
Right. Great. Thanks all. Thanks, Jeff and Christoph, and for presenting. And thanks for all the participants for joining us today. Just a reminder, we will be sending the recording around in the weeks following the conference. So thanks again,
everybody.
And have a great afternoon.